Alright, the next video that we had talked about was basic harmonies. Putting harmonies together, we talked about the basic components that we've been talking about with the notes, and we talked about all the theory, or most of the basic theory involved in that. And then we talked about constructing harmonies. And so now we're going to look at it on this medium of the staff paper. One of the first things I want to say is probably a really good idea for you to download some scores. You want to be able to write it out in your notation software and practice writing the chords and writing the harmonies and things like that. But also you can download scores and read through them and pick the harmonies out. That way you can look at different keys and different scores and be able to look through them, see what's going on, what kind of chord that is, what kind of harmony that is, what kind of addition it might have. Complex harmonies can sometimes have 4 or more notes in them, and sometimes it might be some kind of chord, add 9 or something like that, and you'll be able to pick out what's going on there. What kind of a chord is that, and what does that mean? Looking at them can sometimes be very simple, to where you're looking at some type of a triad, like a C triad, that's just a root third and a fifth. Well, sometimes it can't be. It might be some type of inversion of a sixth chord, where some of the notes ain't all laying on top of it and stacked, that they're underneath it because they've created some type of inversion. And sometimes that's really easy to spot, and sometimes it's not, because if you don't know what root you're looking at, what is the root of that chord? If it's not notated, you know, what that chord is, and you're looking at it and you're going, well, it looks like, well, what the heck kind of chord is that? It kind of throws you a little bit. So hopefully that it's notated pretty well what kind of chord you're looking at, so that you don't start trying to figure out what the root is and get confused about what note's on the bottom, because it might be a first inversion, or it might be a second inversion, or if it's a more complex harmony, it can have a third inversion and sometimes even a fourth inversion, depending on how many notes are in the chord. So we've talked about all that. Let's just take a look at the basics, look at it on the staff paper. So when we're looking at it on the staff paper, we have already talked about looking at it on the piano. And if we've got a piece of paper, or we've got, you know, the piano in front of us, hopefully both, so that, you know, it's really easy to work with both the mediums, the staff and the piano, and or your instrument also, for working out your theory and what's going on. But the first things we were talking about is basic harmonies, two-part harmonies. Now there's 12 chromatic tones in the chromatic scale. When there's 12 tones in the chromatic scale, from, like, if you go from C to C, there's 12 tones there, back to the octave or the root again. So of those 12 tones, there's actually 12 harmonies, two-part harmonies. But actually with the inversions of them, there's actually only 6 of them. There's actually only 6 possible harmonies. And I'll show you. If you go to, like, if you're going on here and you're going like root to flat second here, it's inversion, root to flat second, that's this. If you invert that to where this second note is on the bottom and the first note's on the top, the inversion of it is root to seventh. So you'd be going, it's either going to be root to flat second, or it'll be root to seventh, and it's an inversion of it. It's actually the same harmony. And if you play it on the piano, you've got root to flat second. If you invert that and you take the second note and you take that as the bottom note and you put the first note up on top of it and stack it on top of it, you'll see that it's the seventh. So they're the same harmony, and there's only 6 of them possible. Root to flat second is actually a root to seventh. Root to second, sometimes the second is a ninth. So anytime you see a ninth, you know that they're talking about the second interval, but normally an octave up. So, and root to second is a root, inverted is a root to flat seventh. And a root to flat third, a minor third, inverted is a sixth. Root to sixth inverted. And if you go to a third, a major third, inverted, it's a minor sixth. And if you go to a fourth, it inverted is the fifth. And that can be vice versa also. I mean, if you have a flat sixth, it inverted is a major third. And a tritone, which is root to flat fifth, augmented fourth or diminished fifth, inverted is a root to augmented fifth, augmented fourth or diminished fifth. So there's only actually 6 two-part harmonies possible. And that's what they're going to look like. So, I mean, the understanding of, they're going to be stacked. And you're looking at the staff paper, when they're stacked like that, sometimes they'll be stacked and offset like that a little bit, but basically attached to each other. But basically, it's the same concept of them being stacked like this on top of each other, being in a chord formation to where they're played simultaneously at the same time. So that concept's real simple to get through your head, of that they're stacked. So whenever you're looking at that, the biggest concepts to understand when you're looking at the staff is understanding the whole step concept and the half step concept, and understanding the separations. We talked about the separation between E and F is only a half step, and the separation between C and B is only a half step. All other separations are a whole step. So you get that concept in your head, so that when you're looking at anything on here, you're looking at this and you're going root to fourth, so that you can go through these and you can very quickly understand that you can see that separation right there. You're looking at that C, and that's a flat E, that's going to be a flat third. It's the harmony's a flat third. You normally don't call the harmony root to flat third. It's a flat third harmony, or a sixth harmony. You got this root to the sixth, and you basically have to work through it. There's all kinds of formulas, but I've found that once you start visualizing it and you're seeing it in different keys, and you're being able to separate the notes and being able to look at this and being able to count out the spaces, the more you use it, the more familiar it will become. It's just like anything else. Like driving a car, the more you drive the car, the more simple it gets, and unless you pay attention to things, you look at something, it's a stop sign. You don't have to, it says STOP, you know what that means, stop. And it's, says that makes sense, and it's like, it's the same concept. It's just repetition and going through it and getting familiar with it. But those are those harmonies, and you can take a picture of this and put it on your staff also. I did it in C so that there's no sharps and flats. And you can see that I've made the root from C from here, and I've also made the root from the inversion and the root from C also, so that it starts from C, goes to the flat second, and also starts from C and goes to the seventh, and they're inversions. So you got like the flat third, this harmony here, and it inverted is the sixth harmony. And that just takes time. You want to be able to count out those spacings, whole steps and half steps and things like that, and be able to count between this C and this A, so that you can understand that that's a sixth, and being able to visualize it. The more you use it and the more you get familiar with it, the more you write it, the easier that's going to become. But the concept's very simple, and we've already talked about flats, and we've already talked about sharps, and we've already talked about natural signs and things like that, so that shouldn't be any type of an issue at this point. So those are the basic two-part harmonies. There's only 6 of them, and if you can remember that, it'll be a lot easier when you're composing and doing things to be able to spot that, because it was a huge thing for me when I finally realized there's only actually 6 harmonies, that if I'm playing like a third or a flat minor third, the inverted it's a sixth, because those are 2 very pertinent harmonies to work with. Both of them are very flavorful or very prominent. Minor third is a very prominent harmony, and a sixth is very prominent in using for flavoring, like a sixth or a seventh or a ninth. So those are very good concepts to get in your head and being able to visualize those. You're going to be working with staff a lot, or at least to understand that, and have this stuff to review, and to have some stuff written in your notation software to review if you don't use it a lot, so that it is a tool that you can use and that you are familiar with, and a medium that you're familiar with to work out your theory or in your composition. The next thing we'd be looking at is basic triads. The only complex thing about the triads, that they're normally stacked like this. I'm going root on bottom, and we've talked about inversions. First inversion would be root on the top. Second inversion would be root in the middle. And if you got a complex harmony, you can have it. You can have the fourth inversion. If within 4 notes, you can have actually you have the primary position, root on the bottom, first inversion, root on the top, second inversion, root in the middle, and if you got 4 more notes, you can have a third inversion, which is going to put the note somewhere else. Does that make sense? And it can vary where it goes. And that can be very complex sometimes when you're looking at a piece of sheet music, and if the chord's not written and you're trying to figure out where's the root of this chord, it's got like, 5 harmonies in it, 5 notes in it, and you're thinking, well, that's a fairly complex chord, and where's the root? What's it going off of? And you can normally look at around the rest of the things. If it's not written, you can look at the rest of the music and get a pretty good idea of what's happening. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. Sometimes other instruments might be trying to play harmonies to that chord, or the basic root foundation of that. Does that make sense? Like right here in some type of score, that the basic foundation root is going to be C. But there's also there might be 5 harmonies to that because there's a complex chord, and the other instruments might be playing harmonies to that chord, depending on how the composer's seen it and how he's using the other instruments and their textures and their harmonies to build a composition till it sounds good and full. So that can be a little complicated, and that just takes time looking through it, looking at the scores and really working with it. But the basic concepts of that, you really need to go through there and write them out. This is the basic triads in primary position root on the bottom. Major triad, you can see, that from the basic triads we talked about, that you're going to basically have, when you play the chord, you're going to have the basic triad is going to be, it's going to be 2 whole steps. So it's going to be root, 2 whole steps, and then it's going to be a step and a half up to the 5th. So you got root, 3rd, and 5th. It's going to be 2 whole steps up to the 3rd and a step and a half up to the 5th. And then on the minor, it's going to be a step and a half to the flat 3rd, and then it's going to be 2 whole steps from that to the 5th. And then when you're dealing with the augmented, the augmented is normally stacks of 2 whole steps. So you'd have the root, 2 whole steps to the next note, 2 whole steps to the next note, so on and so forth. Those are the triads anyway. And same thing with the augment and with the diminished, it's going to be stacks of step and a half to the root, step and a half to the next note, step and a half to the next note. Triads of augmented or diminished triads. And sustain is going to be root, and then it's going to go to the 4th and the 5th. So the 4th is from the 3rd, that's 2 whole steps and a half step up to the 4th from the root, and then you're going to have a whole step to the 5th. And that's a very simple concept. When you get into like a diminished 7th or something like that, it's going to have some different notes. So, but we're not going to talk about that right now. The basic triads, those are the basic triads I tell people. Anything else is an add-on, because the most simple things that you're going to, chords and triads, you're going to work with these basic 6 harmonies, the primary and inversion, and you're also going to work with these basic triads, major, minor, augmented, diminished, and sustain. And then when you get to complex harmonies, 4 or more, most of the foundations are major and minor 6th, major and minor dominant 7, major and minor major 7th, and the 9ths. And so those are the basic ones you're working at. And so you understand those steps. Now when you start looking at the 6th, that, we're talking about some of the spacing, and before we go on, we wanted to talk about inversions. You want to be able to go in the second, this is primary position. In the first inversion, it's going to be root on the top. It's going to be root on the top, then it's going to be the 3rd on the bottom and the 5th in the middle. And when you go to root in the middle, which is the second inversion, it's going to be root in the middle, the 3rd is going to be on the top, and the 5th is going to be on the bottom. And if it's minor, it's going to be, you understand that 3rd is going to be either major or minor with either one of those except for the sustain chord. But those are inversions of that also. And so, but those are the positions of it. And that's pretty simple. The complex harmonies, you want to kind of work on those. The inversions of them can be really cool for different flavorings and texture. But until you get more familiar with them, then I wouldn't worry a whole lot about learning all the inversions of the more complex harmonies, until you get really familiar with them. And then, okay, well, you're going to play a minor 6 or something, and you're going to use you're playing a minor 6 and you want to use the flat 3rd. You want to invert it somehow because you want it down lower or you want it up higher or something like that. and you want to change the construction. You want to use the same notes, but you want to construct them in some other way because of the texture it's giving, the feel it's giving. Working with other instruments is normally a huge thing of why you want to work with inversions anyway. Because if I got a piano playing with a guitar, I'm playing this chord in a certain position on a guitar and some type of a triad or the complex harmony some way, and I want to do it differently on the piano so that it complements the guitar rather than just play the same thing. Or if it's not, there's too much bass in it and there's nice and bright sound in the guitar, and I want to go more to the bass end with certain tones of that chord with the piano. That concept can be very, very complex. But the very simple concept, and when we're talking about this, even here we're going to the major and minor sixths, is, and you're going to have the sixth stacked on top of that. The major, like this is the major triad, same as here. And on top of it, you're going to have a sixth stacked on top of it, unless you're dealing with an inversion. And the minor sixth is you're going to have a sixth stacked on top of it, but the minor triad. So it's going to look like that. And then when you go to like the dominant seventh here, you're basically dealing with the major chord. You're dealing with the major chord, but you're using a flat seventh that's going to be stacked on top of it. And when you go to the minor dominant seventh, the minor seventh, you're going to have that third that's here flatted with the flat seventh. So you basically have the minor chord with that flat seventh on it. And the major seventh kind of works the same way. You've got the major chord there underneath it, and then you're just going to have the seventh stacked on top of it. And the major minor seventh, which is basically the major seventh with a flat third, you'll have that like minor chord with that seventh stacked on top of it. And the ninth is you're going to have the root, the second, and the third with a flat seventh stacked on top of it. And with the minor ninth, you're going to have the root, the second, and flat third with the flat seventh stacked on top of it. And this, you can just kind of visualize these. And we talked about why this is natural. So if you're wondering, you're going, well, why is this natural? Because they was using them flat over here, so it's natural here on this next staff. And sometimes the software will do that, it won't. On this one, it's doing that. Sometimes it'll assume that if it's going to the next staff or the next measure that it doesn't need to do that because it's going back to whatever the original key format is, so it doesn't need to put natural signs there. So, but in this software, it is doing that. So that's a real simple concept to understand, and visualizing that takes time. And I suggest those are the basic chords you want to work with, and you want to understand the first inversion, the second inversion of the triad. So I suggest you write them out. These ones, I wouldn't worry. Those are the most fundamental chords. I've learned that sometimes I'll make complex chords sometimes, but I've found that most of the time with those basic harmonies and those inversions, the 6 of them, and those triads, the first couple inversions of them, and those harmonies, the major, minor, 6th, dominant 7th, major 7th, and 9th, that most other chords can be built from those, off of those, as add-ons. Like I've got a major 6 and I want to put an add 9 on it or something like that for flavor, because it works in the key I'm playing in, and it's adding a little bit more texture. It's adding a little bit of a 9th flavor to that 6th, and it's adding a little bit of flavor, and there can be lots of reasons for that. We're not going to get into that too much, but there can be lots of reasons for that, but most of them can be built off of that. And then you get some real complex ones, and by the time you get to that, then you're going to have a pretty good understanding of theory and what you're doing with that anyway. Otherwise, I mean, if you happen to stumble upon one, I mean, that's happened to me numerous occasions on the piano or on the guitar. I'll be like, whoa, that is really cool, bro. What is that? And I'll be trying to figure out, I'm just messing around and put this chord together, but, it's in some type of inversion or something that sounds really cool in an open position on the guitar, and I'll be like, it rings out really nice, and I got to figure out what exactly is that, and where is the root, what am I going to call the root on that, and that can happen. But for the most part, if you can understand these and you work with those from the keys, you're pretty good to go. But that's the basic concept. So whenever you're pulling out a piece of staff paper and you're looking at either the basic harmonies and you're looking at basic triads, or you're looking at more complex chords, that's what's happening. And that's what you're going to be visualizing and what you need to look at. And you understand basically by looking at that what you're looking at. And you're going to have to figure out with the whole step, half step method of what you're looking at. You're going to have to get used to that. Writing them out can help you a lot so that you can get used to going, well, you know, these are my basic triads. And, you know, depending on what key you're playing in, what note. This is starting in C. But if I start it on B, or if I start it on D or G, most of the time it's going to look the same, the way that it's stacked. But sometimes it might look a little different depending on what is the root that you're starting with, so that you want to go back and, you know, visualize it and be able to look at what's flat, what's sharp, and be able to do the whole step, half step method really fast in your head to figure out what exactly you're looking at. So, and if it's inverted, hopefully it's notated. If it's inversion, if it's some type of inversion, like if you're looking at some type of a fourth, that's some type of inversion, it might not be real obvious really quick. What is that? You're like, what the hell is that? You know, I mean, it's like, well, it's some type of fourth inversion. And if you're looking at some type of sustained chord that's a fourth with an add 6 or add 9 or something like that, and you're going, well, if you don't know where the root is, you might be looking at it a minute going, well, what is that? You know, and it's like, because it can be it can be misleading. The same thing as if you're looking at like this flat second. At first appearance, you're looking at that flat second and you're going, well, you know, that's a flat second harmony. You know, it's like, you know, a diminished second harmony, augmented first or diminished second harmony. That's not going to sound really good. And it's really can be deceiving because, you know, it inverted is actually a seventh, and a seventh is a very useful harmony. And a lot of times, you know, same thing with, with the second harmony, you know, you immediately understand the second. It's basically, you know, the ninth, you know, I mean, the ninth is the second, but it's an octave higher. It's like the second interval, but above the first octave of whatever space and octave range you're working in. So that's a real simple concept to understand. And as you get used to looking at these and you go through it and sit there and look at that and you're going C to D, C to D flat. C to D flat is going to be a flat second. So you really quickly understand that. The more separation there is, it takes a little more time. You've got C up to, what is this? Up to the B. You're going to have to count that out, you know, at first for a little while. As you get more and more used to it, that, you know, will get more used to it. And there is a piece of software I do recommend, and I should have recommended this before. I think I did. It's called Musician. And you can get that, and it's got a bunch of tests in it for you testing yourself and just doing it. Set you up some kind of program. You're doing it a few minutes a day or something like that in it. Run through the tests or whatever or something like that. Spend some time getting used to that as you're studying your theory on the staff paper, and it will help a lot. It's a very nice piece of software. There are some things you can do it to customize it, but just the basics on it are really good for showing some music theory concepts and working through your music theory concepts. And I'm sure we'll pull it out a little bit later. But that's the basic concept. So I hope that when we've already talked about the basic harmonies, the two-part harmonies, the three-part triad harmonies, and complex harmonies that are 4 or more notes. And normally what happens with some kind of add-on or something like that, there are lots of different ways to voice it, and there are lots of different theoretical concepts of how to word chords and how you're supposed to, you know, theoretically state what that chord is. We're not going to get too in-depth into that right now. The basic concept and being able to look at it and figure out what it is for the most part. Because once you understand the basic harmonies, the basic triads, the components of those, and the basic complex 4-part harmonies, that most things that are going to be they're going to be either inversions of them, or it's going to be some type of other chord that's going to be maybe an inversion with an add-on, or, you know, like we talked about, minor 6th add 9 or something like that. And you can work through that if you can just sit down and visualize, you know, what that is, and if it's got something else stacked on top of it. If it's got something wedged in the middle of it there, and you're going, well, what is that? Well, now you've got, you know, maybe a 5-part harmony for some reason. because of something that's happening in the composition that a lot of times, unless it's small compositions with not a lot of orchestration, that it'll be spread out more. I mean, a lot of piano parts will be three note triads because they're not trying to get too complex unless it's the focal point of the composition, because they're trying to spread out all those harmonies to a lot of different other instruments to give the whole composition texture, give it more body and different textures when it's voicing the harmonies. Like it'll play a triad here, it'll be playing the sixth or something. It'd be playing the sixth, with the cello, and it'll be playing the add 9 with the violin. Does that make sense? To give it a little bit more different texture and flavor as it's adding those other harmonies into it. But you should always be able to look at that chord and look at the whole score and follow it right down the line and figure out what all harmonies are in at that very moment in time. This is a whole note. It's going to take up this whole measure, but you looking at this at that moment in time, what all notes are in that? They're all going to be harmonizing together and played at the same time. So basically, that all those notes being played all the way down the score at that moment are going to form a harmony of some type. No matter if it's 10 instruments or 50 instruments or 100 instruments, them all playing at whatever notes they're playing at that same moment, that's going to form some type of harmony. And that can help you a lot for looking at different harmonies that are happening in compositions. So that's the very simple concepts of it. And we've already looked at the construction of those. And basically, it's just a matter of being able to take this, copy some of this. I want you to write out the first and second inversion of the triads, the basic ones we talked about. And you can work out the inversions. There's the 3 or 4 inversions of the 4 more note complex harmonies. We've already talked about why I want you to learn those chords and why I want you to learn those triads and those harmonies and what that means and their inversions, so you get real familiar with the music itself, and you can visualize it on a staff paper really well when you see a sixth interval that automatically that's a minor third inverted. It's very helpful to understand that. It's like somebody will say that's a minor third, and if you automatically know that that's an actually inverted sixth, it really helps you understand. You can understand harmonies a lot better. You can hear it. You hear that minor third, you actually hear in a sixth also inverted. It's a sixth is basically the same. It's basically enharmonic. It's the same harmony. And so that's very simple concepts to understand. So basically, that's visualizing it on the staff. And they're going to look different with different key signature. If this was the key of D or something like that, obviously the sharps or the flats that would be attached to these, any one of these chords, might be differently because of the key. And we've already talked about that. And the more you get familiar with those different keys and looking at chords and looking at complex structures on them in different keys, so that when you're looking at something, you can very quickly discern, what's happening there. What is that stack of tones? What is that, and be able to quickly look at a whole step, half step method of figuring it out, or being able to see, a sixth interval really quickly, or a fourth spacing, or a flat sixth, or you're looking at a major third spacing there, or any of the harmonies, and be able to quickly look at them. So it's a good idea to review those so that you can quickly discern what you're looking at. And as you get used to it, at least being able to whole step and half step it, to be able to look at it and be able to quickly discern what you're looking at, to be able to understand what's happening in the music and what the composition is formed of. So I hope that helped. And now I hope that when you pull out a score and you're looking at some composition and you start trying to figure out harmonies, that you can understand what it's going to look like. We've already talked about what those are, and we've already talked about what the concepts are involved in those harmonies. And now you can look at those. You can look at those harmonies in a whole new way on the staff paper, and being able to see them here, and on the piano, being able to play your piano or your paper here, and being able to visualize those. And it's a really good idea to practice those, to go through playing your major chords and playing them from each interval, and being able to see the spacing of what's happening there. If you play a major C on your piano and then you go to play a major D on the piano, rather that's going to be out of the key of C, and it's going to be using an F sharp rather than an F for the D minor, and you'll be able to see that, and it visualizing on there and on your piano to understand your theory and being able to work in this medium. So that's really simple. I mean, I'm thinking there's going to be more to that, but there really isn't. That's the basic concept in what you're looking at. And if you can understand that well enough, you need to start writing it out, reviewing it, looking at some scores and picking out what harmonies are happening there and being able to figure out what harmonies there and work on figuring that out and get familiar with being able to see that. Being able to see that that's a fifth harmony, that's a fourth harmony, and they're the same harmony inverted, and understanding that, and the tritone, root to augmented fourth or diminished fifth, is the same thing inverted. So I hope that helped a lot, and I hope now you pull out the staff paper and you can look at some harmonies on there, the simple harmonies, the basic triads, and the complex harmonies, and be able to work out with what we talked about dealing with the intervals, because it's the same thing we talked about when we talked about we were talking about scales. It's the same. You look at it's the same concept. If you're looking at the simple harmonies, the same concept happens here. That the basic interval spacing, you can look at it as whole steps and half steps and/or intervals, because you've got the root, the third, and the fifth on that major triad, and you understand the step sequence of that is you've got root, 2 whole steps, and then a step and a half up to that fifth. And when you go down to the sixth, and this is a minor sixth, you've got basically the minor triad with a sixth stacked up on top of it. So you got root to the flat third, which is going to be a step and a half. Then you got up to the fifth, which is going to be 2 whole steps over that fifth because you flatted that third. And then it's going to be a whole step to the sixth. There's a whole step between that fifth and that sixth. Doing that with all those chords and getting familiar with that. So not only did we talk about it on the piano, that now you want to do that on the staff paper. So you can very quickly visualize that and go, well, that's the note G, and that's going up to, that's the note G, and it's going up to B there, to B flat. So you can very quickly look at that and understand G to B flat and what that is. So what that is: a whole step, a half step, a step and a half. What is the distance of there? So that, because on this one here, this is a minor dominant seventh, because you've got that third, and then you've got that fifth, and then you're going from that fifth to that flat seventh. So you're going from that fifth is to that flat seventh, is going to be, that fifth to that flat seventh is going to be a step and a half. Correct? Because if you go to that fifth, a step and a half up to the flat seventh is going to be what you have stacked on top of that. So those are very simple concepts to understand, and I hope I didn't make that fuzzy for you not to understand it, but you basically just kind of work through that and figure out what the distance is there. You'll get really used to those natural signs, the flat signs, any sharp signs that happen to show up on there and things like that, by just working through them. But now you know what you need to look at, and you know you need to work on, and you know what it looks like. Visualize it. I'm not going to sit here. There's all kinds of formulas for being able to visualize that very quickly, but basically just being able to look at it, figure out what that is, and being able to look at that really quickly to understand that's a major triad, and really quickly to understand that that's a sixth, because there's a whole step after that fifth, which is going to go to a sixth. And that's the same with any of the chords. Being able to understand what that interval distance is from there. Because you're going from the root. Does that make sense? So you're going to the root, and this is going to be going from the root to the flat seventh for this ninth. But when you're trying to figure out the interval from like this note here to here, that's you're basically, your mind's trying to see that as the root and what's the spacing from there. Unless you're looking at whole step, half step, but you're trying to figure out what's stacked on top of there. You're going, well, I know that's a third. That's a third there. And how many steps and a half of above that third to come up to the ninth? So then you'd be going up from there to try to figure out that that's the flat seventh. And so you'd have that, you'd be looking at a ninth. And it just takes time. So I hope that was fairly clear, so that now when you pull out the staff paper and you're looking at harmonies on there, that you've got this and you've copied this and you've made some inversions of the triads, and you've got the basic chord structures here, the major, minor, sixth, dominant, seventh, major, sevenths, and ninths, and you can start working with writing them out, start working on recognizing them in different keys, and you can pull out some scores and start testing yourself on going through some scores and trying to figure out what are chords you're looking at in the score, no matter what instrument it is, if it's a bass clef or treble clef or what clef it is. I'm trying to stick with bass clef and treble clef for now till you get a little more familiar with other types of clefs. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that now that you can take the things we talked about with the harmonies and the chords and be able to now visualize them on the staff and be able to start working with visualizing them on the staff, building them on the staff, and being able to use that medium with your instrument or with the piano for now to visualize and construct your theory. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Peace, hope, love. I'll see you in the next one.